Book of Heaven, Volume 12, Part 11. February 27th, 1919. In the divine will there is no hindrance for the love of God. Continuing in my usual state, Blessed Jesus, in coming, almost always calls me into his will to repair or to substitute for the acts of creatures in a divine manner. Now on coming he told me, "My daughter, what stench emanates from the earth? I can find no place for myself, and because of the stench, I am forced to flee from the earth. You, however, can make for me some sweet-smelling air that might be suitable for me. And do you know how? By doing what you do in my will. As you do your acts, you shall form for me a divine air, and I shall come to breathe it, and shall find a point of the earth for me. And since my will circulates everywhere, everywhere shall I feel the air that you shall make for me, and it shall break for me the bad air that the earth sends me." After a little while he came back and added, "My daughter, how much darkness! It is such that the earth seems covered with a black mantle, to the point that they can no longer see. They have either become blind or have no light in order to see. And I want not only divine air for me, but also light. Therefore let your acts be continuous in my will, so you shall make not only air for your Jesus, but also light. You shall be my reflector, my reverberation, the reflection of my love and of my very light. Even more, I tell you that as you do your acts in my volition, you shall erect tabernacles. Not only this, as you keep forming thoughts, desires, words, reparations, acts of love, many hosts shall be unleashed from you, because they are consecrated by my will. Oh, what a free outpouring my love shall have! I shall have free field in everything. No more hindrance. As many tabernacles as I want, so many shall I have. The hosts shall be innumerable. At each instant we shall communicate each other together, and I too shall cry out, 'Freedom! Freedom! Come all into my will, and you shall enjoy true freedom.' Outside of my will, how many hindrances does the soul not find? But in my will, she is free. I leave her free to love me as she wants. Even more, I tell her, lay down your human guises. Take the divine. I am not stingy and jealous of my goods. I want you to take everything. Love me immensely. Take all my love. Make it your own. My power, my beauty, make it your own. The more you take, the happier your Jesus shall be." The earth forms few tabernacles for me. The hosts are almost numbered. And then the sacrileges, the irreverences that they do to me. Oh, how offended and hindered is my love. In my will, instead, no hindrance. There is not a shadow of offense. And the creature gives me love, divine reparations, and complete correspondence. And she substitutes together with me for all the evils of the human family. Be attentive, and do not move from the point at which I call you and want you. March 3rd, 1919. The Terrestrial Eden and the Divine Eden. Continuing in my usual state, I was all immersed in the divine volition, and my always lovable Jesus came and pressed me to his heart, telling me, "You are my firstborn daughter of my will. How dear and precious you are in my eyes. I shall keep you so guarded that if in creating man I prepared a terrestrial Eden, for you I have prepared a divine Eden. If in the terrestrial Eden the union between the first ancestors was human, and I gave them to enjoy the most beautiful delights of the earth, while they enjoyed me at intervals, in the divine Eden the union is divine. I shall make you enjoy the most beautiful celestial delights, and you shall enjoy me as much as you want. Even more, I shall be your life, and we shall share together the contentments, the joys, the sweetnesses, and if needed, also the pains." The enemy had access to the terrestrial Eden, and the first sin was committed. In the divine Eden, entrance is precluded to the devil, to passions, and to weaknesses. Even more, he does not want to enter, knowing that my will would burn him more than the very fire of hell. And upon merely feeling the sensation of it, he flees. And you shall begin the first acts in the divine manner, acts that are immense, eternal, infinite, and embrace everything and everyone. And I, interrupting the speaking of Jesus, said, "Jesus, my love, the more you speak about this divine will, the more I am confounded, and I fear. And I feel such annihilation that I feel myself being destroyed, and therefore unable to correspond to your designs." And he, all goodness, added, "It is my will that destroys the human in you, and instead of fearing, you should fling yourself into the immensity of my will. My designs upon you are high, noble, and divine. The very work of creation, oh, how it remains behind this work of calling you to live in the divine will, so as to live in it, not human life, but divine life. It is a stronger outpouring of my love. It is my love, constrained by creatures, such that, unable to contain it any longer, I pour it in torrents towards the one who loves me. And in order to be sure that my love be not rejected and maltreated, I call you into my will, so that neither you nor what is mine may remain without its full effect and in full defense. My daughter, do not sadden with your fears the work of your Jesus, and continue the flight there where I call you. March 6, 1919. Different steps that Jesus takes in the soul to make her live in the divine will. I was all concerned about what my sweet Jesus keeps telling me on the divine volition, and I said to myself, how is it possible that the soul can reach such extent and live more in heaven than on earth? And Jesus, on coming, told me, "My daughter, that which is impossible to the creature, everything is possible for me. It is true that this is the greatest prodigy of my omnipotence and of my love, but when I want, I can do anything, and what seems difficult is very easy to me. However, I want the yes of the creature, and that she lend herself, like soft wax, to whatever I want to make of her. Even more, you must know that before calling her definitively to live in my volition, I call her every now and then. I strip her of everything. I make her undergo a sort of judgment, because in my will there are no judgments. Things remain all confirmed with me. Judgment is outside of my will, but everything that enters into my volition, who can ever dare to place under judgment? And I never judge myself. Not only this, but many times I make her die, also corporally, and then again I give life back to her, and the soul lives as if she did not live. Her heart is in heaven, and to live is her greatest martyrdom. How many times have I not done this for you? These are all dispositions in order to dispose the soul to live in my will. And then the chains of my graces, of my repeated visits, how many have I not given you? Everything was to dispose you to the height of living in the immense sea of my will. Therefore do not want to investigate, but continue your flight. March 9th, 1919. The divine will must be center and nourishment of the soul. As I am in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus draws me always into his will. What an endless abyss! So he told me, "My daughter, take a look at how my humanity swam in the divine volition, which you should imitate." At that moment, I seemed to see a sun before my mind. However, not so small as the one that shines over our horizon, but so big as to surpass the entire surface of the earth. Even more, one could not see where its boundaries reached, and the rays it spread, forming an enchanting harmony around it, went up and down and penetrated everywhere. In the center of this sun, I could see the humanity of our Lord that nourished itself from this sun, and the sun formed the whole of its life. It received everything from the sun, and it gave everything back to it, and like beneficial rain, it spread over the whole human family. What an enchanting sight! Then my sweet Jesus added, "Have you seen how I want you? The sun that you see is my will, in which my humanity resided as within its own center. It received everything from my will. No other food entered into me, not even the nourishment of one thought, of one word or breath entered into me that was nourished by food extraneous to my will. It was right that I should give everything back to it. So do I want you, in the center of my will, from which you shall take the nourishment of everything. Guard yourself well from taking any other food. You would descend from your nobility, and would degrade yourself, like those queens who lower themselves to taking vile and dirty foods unworthy of them. And as you take, you must immediately give everything back to me. So you shall do nothing other than take and give to me. In this way, you two shall form an enchanting harmony between you and me." March 12th, 1919. How the earth is image of one who does not live in the divine will. Continuing in my poor state, my sweet Jesus came for just a little, and clasping me all to his most holy heart, told me, "My daughter, if the earth were not movable and mountainous, but fixed and all one plane, it would enjoy more the benefit of the sun. For the whole earth it would be always midday, the heat equal at all points. Therefore it would produce more fruit. But because it is movable and formed of heights and of depths, it does not receive the light and the heat of the sun equally. And now one point remains in the dark, now another. Other points receive little of the light of the sun. Many lands become sterile because the mountains, with their height, prevent the light and the heat of the sun from penetrating into their depths. And how many more inconveniences! Now, my daughter, I tell you that the earth is image of one who does not live in my will. The human acts render her movable. Weaknesses, passions, defects form the mountains, the sunken places in which dens of vices are formed. So their movability causes darkness and cold for them. And if they enjoy a little bit of light, it is at intervals, because the mounts of their passions come up against this light. How much misery for one who does not live in my will! On the other hand, for the one who lives in my volition, my will renders her fixed, and levels all the mountains of the passions, in such a way as to render her all one plane. And the sun of my volition darts through her as it wants, and there is no receptacle in which its light does not shine. What is the wonder if the soul becomes holier in one day lived in my will than in 100 years outside of my will? March 14th, 1919. Effects of a suffrage done in the divine will. Participation in the pains that the humanity of Jesus received from the divinity. The first soul stigmatized in the divine will. While I was in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, and I saw a late confessor of mine. A thought flashed into my mind. Ask about that thing that you have not told the confessor, whether you are obliged to say it and therefore write it or not. I asked him, telling him what the thing was, and he said to me, "Of course you are obliged." Then he added, "Once you did for me a beautiful suffrage. If you knew the good you did to me, the refreshment that I felt, the years that I paid off." And I don't remember. Tell me what it was, and I shall repeat it for you. And you immersed yourself in the divine volition, and took its power, the immensity of its love, the immense value of the pains of the Son of God, and of all the divine qualities. You came over me and poured them upon me. And as you poured them, I received the bath of the love that the divine power contains, the bath of the beauty, the bath of the blood of Jesus, and of all the divine qualities. Who can tell you the good you did to me? They were all baths that contained a divine power and immensity. Repeat it for me. Repeat it for me. As he was saying this, I found myself back into myself. Now, in order to obey, to my highest confusion and repugnance, I shall say the thing that I had neglected to say and write. I remember that one day my sweet Jesus, speaking to me of his most holy will, and of the pains that the divinity made his most holy humanity suffer in his will, said to me, "My daughter, since I have chosen you as the first one to live life in my will, I want that you too take part in the pains that my humanity received from the divinity in my will. Every time you enter into my volition, You shall find the pains that the divinity gave me, not those that the creatures gave me, although these too were wanted by the eternal will. But since those were given to me by creatures, they were in a finite way. Therefore I want you in my will, in which you shall find pains in an infinite way and innumerable. You shall have countless nails, multiple crowns of thorns, repeated deaths, pains without end, all similar to mine, in a divine way and immense, that shall extend in an infinite way to all, past, present, and future. You shall be the first one who, not a limited number of times as those who have shared in the wounds of my humanity, but as many times as my divinity made me suffer, together with me, shall be the little lamb killed by the hands of my Father, to rise again and be killed again. You shall remain crucified with me by the eternal hands, to receive in you the mark of the eternal, immense, and divine pains. We shall present ourselves together before the throne of the Eternal One, with written on our foreheads, in indelible characters, "We want death to give life to our brothers. We want pains to free them from the eternal pains." Aren't you happy? And I, Jesus, I feel too unworthy, and I believe that you are making a big mistake in choosing me, poor little one. Therefore mind what you do. And Jesus, interrupting my speaking, added, "Why do you fear? Yes, I minded for 32 years of bed in which I have kept you. I exposed you to many trials, and even to death. I calculated everything. And besides, if I am mistaken, it shall be a mistake of your Jesus, that can never do harm to you, but immense good. However, know that I shall have the honor, the glory, of the first soul stigmatized in my will." March 18th, 1919. In his conception, Jesus conceived all souls, their pains, and their deaths. Continuing in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus, making himself seen, drew me into the immensity of his most holy will, in which he showed, as though in act, his conception in the womb of the celestial Mamma. Oh God, what an abyss of love! And my sweet Jesus told me, "Daughter of my will, come to take part in the first deaths and in the pains that my little humanity suffered from my divinity in the act of my conception. As I was conceived, I conceived all souls, past, present, and future, together with me, as my own life. And I also conceived all the pains and the deaths that I was to suffer for each one of them. I had to incorporate everything within me, souls, pains, and death, that each one was to suffer, so as to say to the Father, 'My Father, you shall no longer look at the creature, but only at me, and in me you shall find all, and I shall satisfy for all. As many pains as you want, I shall give them to you. Do you want me to suffer death for each one? I shall suffer it. I accept everything, provided you give life to all.' This is why a divine power and will were needed, in order to give me so many deaths and so many pains, and a divine power and will to make me suffer. And since in my will all souls and all things are in act, so not in an abstract or intentional way as some might think, but in reality I kept all within me, identified with me. They formed my very life. In reality, I died for each one, and I suffered the pains of all. It is true that in this concurred a miracle of my omnipotence, the prodigy of my immense volition. Without my will, my humanity could not have found and embraced all souls, nor could it die so many times. So, my little humanity, as it was conceived, began to suffer alternations of pains and deaths, and all souls swam within me, as if inside an immense sea, forming the members of my members, the blood of my blood, the heart of my heart. How many times my mamma, taking the first place in my humanity, felt my pains and my deaths, and died together with me. How sweet it was for me to find in the love of my mamma the echo of mine. These are profound mysteries, in which the human intellect, not comprehending well, seems to get lost. Therefore come into my will, and take part in the deaths and in the pains that I suffered as soon as my conception was accomplished. From this you shall be able to better comprehend what I tell you. I am unable to say how I found myself in the womb of my Queen Mamma, where I could see the infant Jesus, so very little. But though tiny, he contained everything. A dart of light flashed from his heart into mine, and as it would penetrate into me, I felt myself being given death. And as it would come out, life came back to me. Each touch of that dart produced a most sharp pain, such that I felt myself being undone and dying in reality. And then with its same touch, I felt myself coming to life again. But I don't have the right words to express myself, and therefore I stop here. March 20th, 1919. The deaths and the pains that the divinity made the humanity of Jesus suffer for each soul were not just the intention, but they were real. I felt my poor mind immersed in the pains of my lovable Jesus, and since I had been told that it seemed impossible that Jesus could suffer so many deaths and so many pains for each one, as it is said above, my Jesus told me, "My daughter, my will contains the power of everything. It was enough that my will just wanted it for it to happen. And if it were not so, then my will would have a limit in its power, while I am without limits and infinite in all my things. And it is because of this that whatever I want, I do." Ah, how little I am understood by creatures, and therefore I am not loved. You then come into my humanity, and I shall let you see and touch with your hand what I have told you. At that moment, I found myself in Jesus, from whom the divinity and the eternal volition were inseparable. And this volition, by just wanting it, created repeated deaths, innumerable pains, blows without scourges, sharpest pricks without thorns, with such an ease, just as when, with one fiat, it created billions of stars. It did not take as many fiats for as many stars as it created. One alone was enough. Yet in spite of this, not just one star came out to the light, and the other remained in the divine mind or in the intention, but all of them, in reality, came out, and each one had its own light to adorn our atmosphere. In the same way, it seemed that in the heaven of the most holy humanity of our Lord, with its creative fiat, the divine volition created life and death as many times as it wanted. So finding myself in Jesus, I found myself at that point when Jesus suffered the scourging from the divine hands. By the eternal will's mere wanting so, without blows, without lashes, the flesh of the humanity of Jesus would fall off in pieces. Deep furrows were formed, but in such a harrowing way, in the inmost parts. The obedience of Jesus to that divine volition was such that his humanity would melt by itself, but in such a painful way that it can be said that the scourging that the Jews gave him was the image or the shadow of that which he suffered on the part of the eternal volition. And then, by the divine volition's mere wanting so, his humanity would compose itself. So it happened when he suffered deaths for each creature, and all the rest. I took part in these pains of Jesus, and oh, how vividly I comprehended that the divine volition can make us die as many times as it wants, and then give us life again. Oh God, these are unutterable things, excesses of love, profound mysteries, almost inconceivable to created mind. I felt incapable of coming back to life, to the use of senses, to motion, after suffering those pains. And my blessed Jesus told me, "Daughter of my will gave you pains, and my will gives back to you life, motion, and everything. I shall call you often into my divinity, to take part in the many deaths and pains that, in reality, I suffered for each soul, not as some believe, that it was only in my will, or that I only intended to give life to each one. False, false. They do not know the prodigy, the love, and the power of my will. You who have somehow known the reality of the many deaths suffered for all, do not put it in doubt, but love me and be grateful to me for all, and be ready when my will calls you." You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 12, Part 11. Fiat.